On May 12th, the president landed in Beijing for a 3-day summit. He brought diplomats. He also brought a shadow cabinet of tech CEOs with a combined market cap north of $1 trillion. Tim Cook, Elon Musk, Jensen Huang. And here's what the papers ran with. Photos, handshakes, Xi calling Trump a partner, Trump calling Xi a good friend, warm optics, good vibes. The narrative was peace mission. I want you to look at those photos differently. That handshake isn't diplomacy, it's a circuit breaker. Think about what happens if that photo doesn't exist, if the summit collapses, if the markets read tension instead of warmth. Apple's supply chain runs through Zhengzhou. Tesla's output runs through Shanghai. Nvidia's China revenue is double-digit percentage of their top line. The entanglement is bone deep. If the markets believe the circuit is breaking, if the perception flips from managed tension to unmanaged risk, the sell-off doesn't stop at tech. It cascades through every institution with a stake in the global compute supply chain, which is all of them. So that photo, that's not PR. That's a confidence injection into a system that cannot afford a panic. These CEOs didn't fly to Beijing to negotiate deals. They flew to Beijing because their presence is the deal. $1 trillion in market cap standing behind the president says one thing. The entanglement is too deep to break. Nobody's walking away. Everyone's too invested. It's mutual survival theater. Both sides are so thoroughly embedded in each other's industrial base that the summit is just a quarterly review where everyone nods and says we're good, because the alternative wipes out more value than any trade deal ever could recover. And here's the part that makes it strange and honest at the same time. I do think that they like each other. I wasn't wrong. The warmth isn't fake, but warm feelings aren't what held that summit together. Interdependence held it together. The handshake is infrastructure now. You can't shut it off without shutting down the global economy. She said, partners, not rivals. The markets heard circuit intact. Business continued. That's what the photo was for. The question isn't whether the handshake was real. The question is, what happens the week it doesn't happen? This week, Anthropic finalized a deal to lock in more than 300 megawatts of capacity from the Colossus 1 data center cluster. They're already signaling gigawatt ambition. Let me put that number into context. 300 megawatts. That's a mid-sized power plant. It's not a cloud subscription. It's not a server contract. It's utility, scale infrastructure. Here's what makes this more than a procurement story. Same week as the Colossus deal, Anthropic published a new policy paper. It's called 2028, Two Scenarios for Global AI Leadership. This is not a safety white paper. This is a geopolitical battle plan. The paper frames the entire AI competition as a compute war. 4 fronts: intelligence, domestic adoption, global distribution, resilience. And the paper says, and I'm quoting directly, the race for global AI leadership is in large part a race for compute, not a race for the most ethical model, not a race for the most carefully trained system, a race for compute, raw chips, power lines, megawatts. Then it draws 2 scenarios for 2028. Scenario 1, democracies lock in a commanding 12 to 24-month lead. American AI runs the global economy. Scenario 2, China is neck and neck. Cheaper Chinese models flood the global south on Huawei and Alibaba data centers. The CCP sets the norms. These are the paper's words, not mine. And here's the policy prescription. Close loopholes on chip smuggling, crack down on Chinese labs accessing American chips through offshore data centers, punish what the paper calls distillation attacks. Chinese labs creating fake accounts to harvest outputs from American models and replicate the capabilities at a fraction of the cost. And then, the same week they publish this doctrine, they lock in a power plant's worth of compute from Colossus 1. The paper says democracies need a 12 to 24-month lead. The contract says we're not waiting for Congress to secure it. We're securing the means of production right now. The doctrine and the deal are the same move, but here's where we have to look at the part of the paper Anthropic didn't write. Every frontier AI company, Anthropic included, built their models on the entire internet. Books, articles, conversations, medical forums, code repositories, the raw output of human civilization, scraped without consent and called training data. That's the foundation Claude sits on. That's the foundation they all sit on. Now, the same company is publishing a doctrine about who gets to control the global compute supply chain and locking down capacity at grid scale while they're at it. The same company that trained on stolen human output is arguing democracies must set the rules, and in this very paper, they devote pages to condemning Chinese labs for distillation attacks, extracting knowledge from American models without permission. They call it industrial espionage. They want Congress to make it illegal, but they're silent on the extraction that built their own company, the entire internet. hoovered up without asking, without paying. That's not called distillation. In the paper, it's not mentioned at all. That's the thing about doctrines. They're very clear about what the other side is doing wrong. The paper is not a lie. The Colossus deal is not secret. It's all right there in the public. Anthropic, the company most identified with AI safety, just published a compute dominance strategy and signed a contract to match it in the same week. The strategy is explicit. Identify the battlefield, quantify the lead needed, secure the resources, deploy. 300 megawatts, gigawatt ambition, 12 to 24 month lead by 2028. The AI race stopped being about who writes the cleanest code a while ago. Now it's about who controls the electricity. And the company most famous for preaching caution just bought a power plant and published the doctrine explaining why. Jensen Huang was originally not on the Beijing invite list. The president personally picked him up in Alaska on May 13th. Jensen joined the delegation mid-flight. Now here's what happened while he was in the air. The US Commerce Department cleared a massive chip deal. 10 Chinese firms, Alibaba, Tencent, ByteDance, JD.com among them. Each one is authorized to purchase up to 75,000 H200 chips. That's 750,000 high-end AI accelerators approved for export to the country Washington spent years trying to starve of silicon. But here's what no one is advertising at the summit. Not a single delivery has been made. Zero. Reuters recently confirmed it. 3 sources familiar with the matter. Despite US approval, despite signed purchase orders, the chips haven't moved. Why? Because after the approvals came through, the Chinese firms pulled back. One source told Reuters the pullback followed guidance from Beijing. A fourth source said pressure is mounting inside Beijing to block or tightly vet the orders. And the US Commerce Secretary himself, Howard Lutnick, told a Senate hearing last month the Chinese central government has not let them as of yet buy the chips because they're trying to keep their investment focused on their own domestic industry. That's not a journalist speculation. That's the US Commerce Secretary on the record saying Beijing won't let its own companies accept delivery. Let's rewind to understand why. The chip bans. The US cut off China's access to advanced processors. National security was the argument. The result? Huawei's Ascend line went from a sanctioned telecom footnote to a domestic AI chip contender in under 3 years. The bans didn't cripple China. They lit a fire under its domestic industry. Washington absorbed that lesson, so the strategy shifted. Don't block the chips. Offer them. Make them compliant. Make them useful enough to deploy. Make them just below the threshold where domestic alternatives become unnecessary. The goal isn't to starve China of compute anymore. The goal is to make American architecture the default, so homegrown silicon never reaches critical mass. The playbook flipped from prohibition to maintenance. Beijing isn't taking the offer. And the reason, according to the Reuters reporting, is straightforward. Beijing fears those H200 imports will undercut its domestic chip push. DeepSeek and other Chinese labs are already running on Huawei silicon. The State Council recently issued 2 supply chain security regulations directing agencies to identify and eliminate foreign dependencies in critical tech infrastructure. Accepting 750,000 American chips would be walking directly into the dependency that they've been trying to eliminate. So Chinese companies have US approval, they have purchase orders, and they cannot take delivery. Not because of a formal blockade, but because Beijing is making it clear through guidance and regulatory pressure that the answer is no. It's not a locked door, it's a door nobody will walk through. This is addiction management at state level. Both governments are playing the same hand from opposite sides. The US is offering compliant product to keep China tethered to American architecture. China is declining the dose to protect its domestic supply chain. And Jensen Huang, the man picked up in Alaska and brought to the table, is standing between them, trying to convince everyone the pipeline still works. His company's China revenue depends on it. He warned publicly that the Nvidia share of AI accelerators in China has effectively fallen to zero. The chipmaker whose chips Beijing is quietly steering its companies away from is in the same room as the men who approved the sale and the men ensuring the sale goes nowhere. In that same Anthropic paper, the one that says the race for global AI leadership is in large part a race for compute, the company argues against letting China get hooked on American chips. The Commerce Department is doing the opposite. Beijing is settling the argument by simply not showing up to collect. So here's what this week actually was underneath all the headlines. The Handshake said, the old system is too entangled to break. Manage it. The data center deal said, the window is closing, lock it. The H200 deal said, the dependency is a trap, decline it. 3 strategies, 1 global compute supply chain. Everyone is responding to the same pressure in opposite ways. The CEOs flew to Beijing to prove the circuit still works. Anthropic bought a power plant to build an escape route. Beijing quietly steered its companies away from American chips to protect its domestic pipeline. Nobody is wrong. Everybody is responding to the same incentive. Move before someone else moves first. The economy underneath all of this isn't driven by ideology. It's driven by the physical stuff: chips, power lines, factory floors, handshakes that prevent sell-offs, the things you can touch, the things you can turn off, the things you can deny someone else access to. That's where the leverage lives now. Not in the software, in the hardware. Not in the models, in the megawatts. 3 exits from the hostage economy: diplomacy, infrastructure, decline, pick one. The signal is the same signal it's always been. The future isn't being negotiated, it's being built. And the people building it are making very difficult bets about who gets to own the foundation. Watch who's moving, watch what they're moving, and watch who gets left standing in the doorway. No panic, just signal. I'll see you next Friday.